And we are live, episode 240, Better on Draft podcast. Sorry for being tardy. We are going to blame it on our guest who decided to try to, wash his laptop with water and soap. Apparently, not a smart idea. So he got his laptop ready to go. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. I am going to start off the show by telling you what I'm drinking, and I am drinking. It looks like it's called Ol Oi.
Oh, cool.
It is a Jester King sour brown ale, which means that our guest this week is from Jester King. If you guys couldn't tell by the name of the episode, as well as the man in the video, but we have Jeffrey Stuffings from Jester King. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you have a beer with us.
I do. I'm actually drinking a beer from Chicago from Hop Butcher for the World. It's a Mosaic Matueka Eldorado double IPA from Hop Butcher.
Well, why not, for the listening audience, talk to me about this beer that I am drinking in the nice glass because it's a giant bottle. Thank you, Rob, for bringing it. What is this beer? Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, you sure did. It is a classic style. I mean, it is a Flanders style brown ale. It's we do an Oud Bruin and a Flanders red ale, and we actually haven't released. What's the date on that? We haven't released that beer in a
2020,
while.
I think.
No.
January 2020. Blend
Okay.
number
Gosh.
6.
Well, time flies. Flanders brown ale. So just kind of a grist with some more highly killed malts, and then just aged in neutral oak for about roughly 14 months before blending and bottling.
And for a novice like myself, what is the difference between a Flanders brown and an Oud Bruin?
Not a ton. I mean, historically, perhaps there was more difference, but I would say in the modern context, it's really just kind of a change in grist. Kind of your brown ale versus kind of red ale grist. At least that's how we approach it. So otherwise, like the fermentation, primary and then secondary in oak is all practically the same.
Well, I can't do this show alone, so I'm going to bring in Dan. Dan, how you doing today?
Hey, what's going on? How are you?
Pretty good. What are you drinking over there?
Sticking to my liquor run for the month here, working on the vodka soda. Also got that Bloody Mary going.
Staying consistent. I like to see it. Why don't you
Yes,
throw
sir.
a question over to Mr. Stuffings?
Yeah, so I had noticed you're from kind of our neck of the woods. Looks like you went to Notre Dame, hanging out in South Bend. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So why Texas? That's quite a big move. I myself moved not too long ago from the Detroit area, too long ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, down to the Phoenix area. So I know the big move. What made you move down there to open up a brewery?
Yeah, when I was at Notre Dame, I met a woman from Lubbock, Texas, my wife Amber. So we started dating in college, and then when we were deciding where to go after school, I'd moved around a bunch growing up and didn't really feel a close connection to really any state. So I was happy to try out Texas, and had liked visiting Austin. It's a cool town. Definitely recommend visiting. Just followed my wife to Texas.
Awesome.
All right. Well, of course, we have a few more co-hosts today. Nick, how you doing?
Not too bad. The new job assignment starts on Monday, so here's my last day as an engineer. And
Time to party. What are you drinking?
I got Night Swimmer Stout from that's this guy from Storm Cloud, and then I got the Fudgy Kruger from Big Lake.
All right. Why don't you throw Jeffrey here a question?
So I learned just before we came on that you have this big piece of property that Jester King sits on. What can you possibly do with this big 200 acre? It's about 200 acres, right? Or give or take?
A little shy of that, but in that ballpark, yeah.
It's in that, but what do you guys do with all of that land? It's not just brewing beer, I'm guessing.
No, you're absolutely right. Primarily just to provide kind of a rustic, rural, hill country place for people to visit. The land around us is quickly getting developed. I mean, Texas has, 4 of the top 10 fastest growing cities in the country, and people moving here from all over the country. And so we've seen the areas around us, turn into, developments, commercial developments, subdivisions and whatnot. So we really wanted to just preserve a little piece of the hill country for people to enjoy. That's been part of our mission over the years. We are a farmhouse brewery. We aspire to use, to the extent we can, 100% local ingredients and growing our own, produce and fruits and vegetables for brewing, as well as our small, kitchen here. It's been part of our goal over the years as well. And then, we raise some livestock. We have a herd of goats, and so providing a space for them to kind of roam. We planted a vineyard 2 years ago. We have aspirations of making wine in the future. So we're working on growing our own grapes. And then on top of that, we have a farm trail and a new nature trail, which is about like a just 2-mile loop throughout the property. And we've done some 5K charity fun runs through the land of Jester King, but really just providing a little piece of the hill country that hopefully gets preserved for the long term for people to enjoy.
It's interesting that a business is doing something like that. Now it's not unusual for communities like cities and townships to try and keep a little piece of that that are tradition in their communities. If you're familiar with Michigan, I don't know. I'm not that far from the farmland here where I'm at. I'm a little farther north than the other guys on this show. But it's not unusual for communities. I think it's pretty cool that a business such as Jester King Brewing is doing it by themselves and trying to preserve a little bit of piece of that tradition of the original land, so to speak. So not a lot of businesses can probably say something like that. So I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
And finally, to round out, Wendy is not here today, but Rob is. How are you, Rob?
Doing all right, man. Doing good.
What is on the menu tonight for drinking?
On the menu right now is that I have a Bark Lord from Transient, obviously on our third coast over by Lake Michigan. And I have in the Black is Beautiful glass, the Black is Beautiful from Jester King.
Right on.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with I guess my first one here. And that I was looking into your brewing history and actually just kind of wanted you to talk about that and your love of beer. But what I wanted to talk about, as the saying goes, is your Harajuku moment, which is the moment where a person actually is ready and willing to change their life. Now, in terms of a beer sense, it's not like there is a particular farmhouse ale that comes from our area that may be somewhat responsible for that. So I was wondering if you could tell everybody your initial encounter with that farmhouse ale. And I guess what I want to know is how much was that beer a factor in deciding to create what is now Jester King?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and speaks to our indirect Michigan roots here at Jester King. I was living in Chicago, teaching high school there after college before moving to Texas, and a buddy of mine was going to Michigan. He was in the business program there, and I'd heard of this brewery in Dexter that sounded really, really cool, and of course that was Jolly Pumpkin. This is 2005-ish. So I think just a few years after Jolly Pumpkin started. And, I didn't know what to expect. I've just been told you got to try this oak aged, sour beer, wild ale from Jolly Pumpkin. And so my buddy who was at Michigan sent me La Roja, Oro de Calabaza, and Calabaza Blanca, the white ale from Jolly Pumpkin. And it just blew my mind, as well as some Bam beer, of course. And just as far as what fermentation profile could be like in beer, it was just massively eye-opening. I had moved to Chicago after college, and in college, I was getting a little bit into Three Floyds, living in Indiana, and drinking some IPAs, like Alpha King, and was drinking some of the Bells and Founders stuff, being in y'all's part of the country. And that was awesome. But, those beers being, pure culture fermentation were all, in a certain category where, the Jolly Pumpkin stuff was just it felt like it was delivered from a spaceship, and it just very, very, very much influenced the direction that I wanted to take Jester King. I mean, we had other influence as well. It wasn't 100% Jolly Pumpkin, but after tasting their beer, I went from home brewing, pale ales and IPAs and stouts to starting to experiment with mixed culture fermentation. And thankfully, as far as our professional development as a brewery, Ron Jeffries, co-founder of Jolly Pumpkin with his wife Lori, was just an open book and became kind of our sensei, if you will, as far as like developing a wild program at Jester King. So big cheers and props to Jolly Pumpkin for lighting the way for us.
I was talking to a brewery out here in Michigan. His name's Dane. He owns Eastern Market Brewing and Ferndale Project, and he talked about, you're going to have Jeffrey Stuffings on. You need to talk to him about how much he loves Ron Jeffries over at Jolly Pumpkin. Well, obviously, we do a lot of research with Better on Draft and who we're talking to, and you actually got a chance to come up here in Michigan and clean a mash tun, excuse me, according to your Twitter. What was it like coming up here in the dead of winter, January 2017, and did you get a chance to try any of our other beers?
It was a pretty quick trip. So I was in Ann Arbor just for like 2 days, and unfortunately didn't get to visit any other breweries besides Jolly Pumpkin. But did go out there and spent 2 days in Dexter with Ron and brewed a few beers with him. A barrel-aged or fruiter-aged wild beer with some preserved citrus from Texas, and then a 100% spontaneous fermentation that was inspired by the Lambicus dexterius that Ron has done over the years. And really got to hang out with him and just kind of pick his mind further. And it was definitely just kind of like a milestone in my brewing career, getting to make a beer with the brewer that in large part inspired me to do barrel aged wild beers. He's just one of the nicest individuals you could possibly encounter. And Ron, I appreciated this. A lot of times you go to a brewery for a collaboration, and it's let's hang out, let's drink some beers, let's have fun, and that's wonderful. But Ron was like, okay, you got to work, and that was cool. And he's like he approaches wild, just as far as the running of a brewery, he makes no distinction between like wild fermentation, which in my experience you can be a little bit more lax with in terms of your level of not cleanliness, but your level of sanitation, where Ron approaches it very meticulously. Like because I was cleaning the mash tun for Ron Jeffries, I'm like, I'm going to try to do an amazing job so I don't let down this guy I highly respect. And he still like kind of took me to task for like some of the things that I missed in doing it. So, but he's a special dude, and he's provided a lot of guidance for a lot of brewers. And he is the pandemic has slowed a lot of people down, but he's on track to. I'm 99% sure, this is kind of public knowledge, but he and Lori are going to be opening up a new project in Hawaii in the coming. Probably not this year because of COVID, but hopefully next year.
Before I send it back to Rob, I had one follow-up question just because I don't know. What is a fooder beer?
Oh, just large oak tank essentially. Kind of this large oak tank with big hoops around it, and we do most of our barrel aging in barrels that are anywhere from about 225 liters to 600 liters, but these fooders will be like 45 like hectoliters or in gallons, about like 1,000 gallons or so, and we got them from wineries, just like large oak tanks, just to let wild fermentation take place, and a little bit of like micro oxidation to permeate the wood and drive some of the fermentation character.
Now, kind of talking about fermentation, and you mentioned already that you guys do make a lot of wild beers. I guess talk to us about what a wild beer is, and the process of spontaneous fermentation, which I can't say that I'm very familiar with it, and just like how is it different from your typical fermentation process with beer?
Yeah, great question. Wild fermentation, I would just say in a phrase, and I'm stealing this phrase from the author Jeff Sparrow. It's the world beyond cultured brewer's yeast. So, when I started home brewing, I went to my local homebrew shop, Austin Homebrew Supply, and got a recipe for just an American pale ale, and got a pitch of California ale yeast, and it ferments the beer out super clean and consistent and predictable, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's a wonderful thing. You go back, brewing began, we think, somewhere between 10 to 20,000 years ago. There was no pure culture fermentation. There was no scientific ability to isolate one strain of yeast that's going to produce very clean, consistent, predictable results. So by nature of just the scientific dark ages, all beer was wild, just a product of just the microorganisms that are all around us in our environment. I mean, these microbes, of course, are just teeming. They're invisible, but obviously they're just teeming all around us. And I always tell people, you want to see fermentation go, just put some fruit juice on your kitchen counter and just let it sit out overnight, and then put it in a jar and put a little stopper airlock on it and let it go. It will turn into wine, just that simply. So spontaneous fermentation, what is it? It's just relying on native ambient airborne yeast to ferment sources of sugar into beer. If the sources of sugar happen to be from grain, well, then it's beer. If it's from fruit, wine, or then you get into kimchi or sauerkraut, or you name it. There's just so many different types of foods and drinks that can be spontaneously fermented. But just again, what is wild for us? It's just venturing out beyond pure culture brewer's yeast and borrowing from the environment, to ferment the beer. So it's kind of harkening back to kind of an old world way of fermentation.
Okay. And I guess going to another beer style, because I was looking at your site and looking at some of the beers that you've been putting out, and one that I think has been building a bit more interest, which I've had from one of our local breweries that are out here, but I'd never asked them what makes it different. So obviously, for a lot of us, we've had Pilsners. What is it that makes an Italian style Pilsner Italian style?
Yes, and I'll just be first to say that I am absolutely no expert on this. We've started making pale lagers. Really, was just in the last 12 months. It's been something new for us. And just a quick aside as to our motivation. We found that beer has become, I think, exceedingly more local. Where our main clientele 5-6 years ago, I think were beer geeks. I say that affectionately. Beer geeks from all over the country. And as there's now going from 1,000 breweries when we started to about 8,000 today. Beer is extremely more local. Where a lot of our customers are just folks from a 5-mile radius, just coming out to hang out with their friends or family. So we started to do some styles that are a little bit more mainstream and accessible. And doing pale lagers has been one of the things that has been in that vein. And I'm just a big personal fan of pale lagers myself. And then one of the styles that I've liked the most is Italian style pils. Really, you can kind of trace back, it's somewhat of a modern style. Birrificio Italiano near Parma, Bologna area in northern Italy kind of originated the style in the modern context. And in a phrase, it's just essentially a kind of more highly hopped and dry hopped Pilsner, really using some of those classic noble or noble-esque varieties of hops. Domestically, so there's Tipo Pils, which Birrificio Italiano has done, which I think is kind of the just emblematic of the style. And then domestically, the Pivo Pils from Firestone Walker, Another one of my favorite breweries is, I think, kind of like the American example, I'd say.
Okay. One more for me, which I was definitely doing some digging here. Not only did you go to, you have a Doctor of Jurisprudence degree from Boston College, and you are, or at least in your past life, have been a lawyer. Now,
Yes.
going into, I guess, digging into law and a little bit of politics, I know that Texas has been dealing with some legislative walls in the last 16 months. Back in June 2019, Texas finally became the last state to legalize beer to go. And what's confusing me right now is that while that was legalized, it was in, I believe it was in the same month that there was a Senate bill where it allowed those with beer and wine retailers licenses to deliver beer and wine, which really confused me when I noticed that you, I mean, as far as Jester King on your blog site, that you are with, along with the Texas Craft Brewers Guild, petitioning for breweries to be able to ship and deliver beer. And that really threw me off because I was kind of thinking, well, why aren't you guys included in that part of the Senate bill? So I'm wondering, is this fight still going on? And are there any other changes you'd like to see happen in Texas that will help during this pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. We were super grateful when last year Texas became the last state in the country to allow production breweries to sell beer to go. We've been licensed as a brew pub since 2013. So since we're in the retail tier of the free tier system, we've been able to sell beer to go from our brewery for a while now. And going back to talking about being able to purchase some land and preserve some land out here in the hill country. That's all because we've been able to sell beer to go. I mean, the margin on beer is pretty good when you sell it at the brewery. When you start selling it through distribution, the margin really kind of gets cut dramatically. So we're really grateful that our production tier friends like Austin Beer Works and Live Oak and Real Ale here in Texas, could start selling beer to go as well. So yeah, we're finally on even footing in that department with the rest of the country. One thing during COVID that hasn't been helpful in Texas is, as you referenced, we can't sell beer to go. I'm sorry, we can't distribute. We can't deliver beer is the word I was searching for, or ship it. So that's been kind of a big hindrance, especially not so much now because like people are coming out again, in a socially distanced way, but people are, but during those like early months, like March, April, May, when we saw our business just like get sliced in like half, or even in, almost like initially it was like 70% of our business like evaporated overnight. And that was really scary. And, thankfully it's kind of clawed back, not all the way, but it's clawed back over the last 7 months. But during that early phase, if we could have like delivered beer to people's houses or shipped it in the mail, that would have been hugely helpful. The beer lobby, the distributor lobby in Texas is really powerful. We have the largest Miller Coors distributorship out of, Andrews Beverage out of Dallas Fort Worth. Largest AB InBev distributorship, Silver Eagle, is in Houston. And they tend to get their way, and they've made no bones about it. They don't like craft beer. They want craft beer to go away. They wish it was just all, them and their shadow companies, selling all the beer in the state. And, it's unfortunate. And we've fought as hard as we possibly can, in my opinion, for, independent, craft beer. It's not that I don't think, the macro producers make good beer. And, I drink their beer on occasion. It's not that I don't think it's good. It's just that every step of the way they try to, just squash the little guy. And, if it's something good for us, they're automatically against it, which really sucks. And they're very, anti-competitive and anti-capitalistic. So yeah, I really have a bone to pick with the big distributors. They make it hard for the little guys to operate.
Gotcha. All right, I'm gonna pass this over to Dan. So I think he's got a couple.
Yeah, I've got one here for you. Basically, on what you just brought up here, I noticed taking a look at your website that you do ship beer to Washington State. How did that come along, and how does that work for you based on shipping for anywhere else?
So in Washington, we can bypass one of the three tiers. So we can bypass just due to Washington law. We can bypass the distribution tier and sell like straight to the retail tier. So we make a little bit better margin off of shipping to Washington State. We're close friends with a brewery called Fair Isle, which is in Seattle. In transparency, Jester King is very tiny ownership stake in Fair Isle. But with that said, they can sell beer. Fair Isle can ship beer to Washington State residents. So it's not quite as good as being able to ship beer directly ourselves, but it's like the next layer removed from that, which has been helpful. And they're a small, fledgling brewery that opened like late. Well, like sometime in 2019, I'm not sure exactly when, but being able to help them out too a little bit, like being able to send them some beer and for them to be able to make a little margin off of that beer too has been good. But yeah, Washington has, in my opinion, the best beer laws in the United States, which is one of the reasons they've had such a vibrant craft beer scene.
Now I got a chance to go to because I'm looking up because I've been to Seattle probably 8 times over the last year. My work brought me there just so many times, and I realized you're over where Rubens and Stoop is. Not you, I'm sorry, Fair Isle. Portion of you. Um, are you guys part of that like passport over there? Because I feel like I would have went there, but I don't recall going there. I also went to Poplux and Lucky Envelope and Fremont, and I might have been a few too many in.
Yeah. As far as Jester King, no, I don't believe so. But Fair Isle, yeah, I'm not sure. I've not been out to Seattle since they opened, and I've traveled a little bit during COVID, but it's been so weird just having like beer events just like gone. Beer events has been a major way that we've kind of marketed our company and connected with other brewers through collaborations, and I would say I've averaged like 2 out-of-state events a month for like 6 or 7 years. It's just been a major part of who we are and what we've done. So it's been like surreal essentially to have just been, as far as beer events go at home since March. So I gotta claim ignorance. I don't know what's going on out there in Seattle these days.
I want to, before I pass it to Nick, because Nick I know wants to ask a lot about the site your place sits on over in Austin, Texas. But you mentioned out of state events, and I don't think it's a touchy subject just because of how outspoken you are. But I kind of want to touch on the Wicked Weed and you guys pulling out of the collaboration with Wicked Weed. At that time, Wicked Weed had just sold to Anheuser-Busch InBev, and I believe memory is a little hazy. You guys dumped the beer, correct?
We sent it back.
Sent it back. Okay.
Yeah.
I know you obviously had a rapport with the folks over at Wicked Weed with the brewers and stuff. How do how has that come through 3 years later where some of these guys might not be there anymore? Like, what's your guys' rapport currently with Wicked Weed or a lot of these other ABI companies during that 2017, when they were buying up? I think did they did Devil's Backbone too? I feel like there was a handful of them that year.
Yeah, so it kind of cuts two ways. Like on a personal level, I still, love the Wicked Weed family, at least the folks that, I got to know really well throughout the process of, befriending them and doing, I think almost half a dozen collaborations over a 3 or 4 year period. Particularly, the co-founder, Walt Dickinson, and, Jen, their head blender. Yeah, they're wonderful people, and I just on a personal level, I have like the most positive things to say about them, and do not begrudge anyone's business decisions, even if it's who's to say? I mean, who's to say if I was in that situation and offered? I have no idea what the numbers were, but if offered that type of money, that I would have said no to that. So I'm not going to sit here and I feel like a hypocrite if I were to, criticize their decisions on a personal level. On a professional level, though, I mean, we have our company principles, and one of them is, as like I was mentioning, is that fierce, stance for independence. I mean, I get, how, massive economies of scale and chain businesses provide value, and I shop at Target and stuff like that. So I'm not like totally, pure on this subject, but when it comes to craft beer, the industry I'm most passionate about, I want to support small local business. I want, the dollars to flow back into the community and back into the community of, the various providers that provide, the grain and, adjunct ingredients that go into these beers. And then also, like I was mentioning, it really sucks how, the distributors like really try to hold back small independent business, craft breweries. And if they weren't doing that, I would be, take a lot friendlier stance towards them. So, when, Wicked Weed was purchased by AB InBev, the largest brewery in the world, doing hundreds of millions of barrels a year, that consistently in Texas fights against the interests of small brewers. I mean, we had to part ways, and not to kind of reveal too much of my personal conversations, particularly with Walt, the co-founder, but he was nothing but supportive of encouraging when I told him that we just can't work together anymore, and he totally understood. So we're still very tight personally, but our professional principles just forbid us from continuing to work together. And I'm sometimes a bit of a black sheep in this area, but I do really feel that independent craft. I hope we're doing all right.
I was gonna say, what is going on with Ken right there for a moment?
It's that sour. It got caught in my throat. And damn.
Were you having a sneezing fit there? Or?
No, just a coughing fit. Like I just tasted that sour throat taste, but it just kept staying there. I didn't even have a beer. Damn.
Maybe. I mean, acetic acid is something that we really try to keep out of our beer. I've been around, our beer for so long. I feel like hopefully that Oloy, now that's coming up on, like 9 months old, hopefully it hasn't gone a little acidic. Like you should get like soft acid. If it's like coming off as vinegary, then, the beer perhaps hasn't matured in a great way.
It could be just because I'm drinking it through a straw. So,
I guess really quick, just to jump in on that, I'll hand it off to Nick. But the beer that Ken has, that was courtesy of Tavour, which I believe I still have my promo code Robert, ROBEAR, which gets you a $10 credit for $5 that you spend. But with that coming from them, I feel like I just got that maybe about 2 months ago. And with it being bottled in January, that does kind of make me worry about some things that get distributed from box delivery services like Tavour or Beer Box, or I mean, there's a couple that are others that are out there. And I guess I'm curious about your relationship with them, and in that there's a little bit of a worry that comes from breweries where if their beer gets taken from a distributor to a shelf and it sits there for 6 months, a year, and someone buys that beer and then suddenly that beer is bad, that people are going to take that out on the brewery. They're not going to take that on a distributor. So it makes me kind of think with the delivery services, what kind of relationship do you guys have with them?
I would say overall, really, really great. Anything that cuts down on the 3-tier system, I am a fan of. I see it as largely antiquated, and I'm not trying to, make distributors disappear. They play a valuable role, but just the rigidity of it kind of sucks. And so we love Tavour, and being able to just cut out the middleman. I think it's more, democratic distribution of beer for the people. And, also it's, I think, just the convenience of having it shipped to your doorstep is awesome. So I'm a big fan, and we've done, during COVID, more business with Tavour than we ever have before. And I hope, that continues as a trend of like a positive development, silver lining of the pandemic is that we just see like less kind of that traditional 3-tier system and more just kind of the virtual online distribution proliferation of beer. As far as like, just beer that's like sitting around, I would put that on the brewer. I'd be like, make stuff that moves faster. I mean, and our beers do hold up well. Mixed culture fermentation, the wild yeast and bacteria, does, have this kind of beautiful preservative quality. Wild yeast and bacteria has the ability, particularly Brettanomyces yeast has the ability to scavenge oxygen and keep beers pretty fresh for the long term. But if a beer isn't presenting well, no, it's never going to be as fresh to the mail as, going to your local brewery. And again, our styles do sometimes do better with time. But I don't know. I kind of have a feeling that if there's like beer that's just not in great shape, I'd probably put it on us more than them. They're pretty efficient in their treatment.
All right. Well, I'm gonna definitely make sure we cut that for a Tavor testimonial so they can send us some more. We appreciate that. All right, Nick,
Right on.
got a couple. Go for it.
I want to piggyback on what Ken was talking about on collaborations. Going through your beer menu. Now, mind you, never been to Texas before. My wife and I wanted to go see a Cowboys game when the Lions play. Obviously, not in the cards right now.
Right.
But one thing that I saw was the number of different beers with collaborations. Mikkeller is one. You done one with a brewery in Sweden, a couple of local breweries in Texas. What are some of your favorite collaborations? And why don't you talk about maybe like one or two of those beers that you've done? Like, what are some favorite ones that you've done in the past?
Yeah, definitely one that comes to mind is one of our main inspirations besides Jolly Pumpkin is a little small farmhouse brewery in northern France called Thierry. They're very close to the border with France, and border with Belgium. They're in France, and they've been making just beautiful farmhouse ales for 2 decades, and we make this beer called Petit Prince, which is a farmhouse table beer, and farmhouse ales historically, from what I can discern, were beers that were largely for just nourishment and hydration. Like they were a source of when water supplies weren't necessarily trustworthy, or workers just needed beer that wasn't going to make them unable to work, but they still wanted something to drink during their workday. They would drink low alcohol farmhouse beers. Like beer, I think, has always kind of had this agrarian nature that was very, very drinkable, where you could drink like a liter or two of beer during your workday and still be able to operate. And I think that's wonderful for that farmhouse tradition. So Thierry inspired us, and Petit Prince being like a 2.9% alcohol table beer is something that we really wanted to brew with them. The French Saison yeast that's part of our mixed culture is thought to have originated out of Thierry. So getting to brew, we called it La Petite Princesse. And so we brewed that, I think it was like 2014. So getting to do like a table beer with Thierry in France was pretty amazing. Another one that comes to mind in that area, we've been really inspired by Fantôme and the farmhouse ale saisons that come out of Fantôme outside of Brussels in a little town called Troyes, Belgium. And 2013-ish, I think, getting to go and brew with Danny Prignon from Fantôme was pretty cool. And he has just this like incredible like Willy Wonka style like put together brew house that just is unlike anything I've ever seen before. And he's just a really, really, really like Ron Jeffries, just such a sweet human being. And getting to brew with Danny was pretty amazing. So those two stick out. Like I said, we've been inspired by Jolly Pumpkin and Allagash and Russian River. But similarly, we've been inspired by like Thierry and Fantôme and Cantillon as far as European breweries.
I had to look up Fantôme real quick, and the first thing that popped up was Wikipedia, and nothing was below 8% on the beer list. So it's like, okay, that's kind of like what we normally drink on this show, but normally it's 10% or better on this show. So I want to go back to the site for a moment. I'm stuck on this idea of 200 acres that you guys own and you guys grow, and apparently you guys rent space out and you'll have lodging there on the property as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of a new development. We have a couple houses and cabins for people to come out and stay, and we're at the crow flies about 20 miles from the Texas, and we're kind of like a close-in getaway. And going back to my comments about beer becoming more local, a lot of our efforts are now in our hospitality and food and private events and lodging and stuff that I never really thought we'd be into when our only goal starting out was just to make craft beer. Yeah, that's just kind of the way things have developed, where I think breweries are more community centers and destinations and places to go hang out with your friends or family, either for the afternoon or in some cases maybe for the weekend. Also during COVID, people have been real happy to kind of come out to the hill country area where we're located, just given how low the population density is out here. Even though there's a lot of growth, like I mentioned, it's still pretty spread out. So that's been something that it's been, again, like a silver lining during this time, as people are coming out to stay at our place.
I mean, you guys host, I see wedding photos. I've seen some of the pictures of some of the places that I could sleep in. So like, for example, there is a house, you call it the Waterloo House, with an upstairs sleeping loft. I don't know if it's probably too small of a bed for me. I'm kind of spoiled. I need the king size bed, but basically I could stay there the weekend. I could walk to the brewery in the afternoon, have a drink, go moseying around the property, come back for dinner for a meal and more beer. That's basically what I can do at the site, basically, right? I mean,
yeah, no, that's right. And to put a plug in for some of our neighbors, like there's within a let's say 5-mile radius, there's probably almost 15 different breweries, wineries, distilleries, cideries. So just our little area outside of Austin has become this kind of mecca for fermentation and booze. So yeah, it's a cool place to come visit.
Ken, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, first I wanted to kind of go back a little bit, just because I had a coughing fit when you were talking, and I wanted to mention there is a really good book out that I'm re-listening to called Barrel Aged Stouts and Selling Out by Josh Noel, which talks a lot about the I guess you could say shady things that these bud houses and miller houses do to make sure that they kind of squash the industry. And part of it, which I'm starting to believe happened to cause the early 2000s craft collapse, where a lot of these craft breweries were losing 60, 70, 80% of their houses of where they can distro beer, to where you can't survive when you lose that much distribution if you jump into distribution as a craft brewery, because you're going to live and die by the distribution, especially by the contracts that you sign. We learned that along with, if you check out our previous episode, our most recent one, which was still a while ago, with Liberty Street and getting out of distribution. With that in mind, I have the pressing question that I have to ask everyone that comes on this show. Jeffrey, what is in your refrigerator right now that is beer that's not Jester King?
Oh, sure. So I mentioned I love pale lagers, pilsners, Helles, Italian style pills, all this stuff. I drink a lot of live oak pills from live oak. I drink a lot of Hans pills, which is from Real Ale. Always try to keep some Jolly Pumpkin around. I drink plenty of hoppy beers too. Some of those same local breweries, do some nice IPAs. And then, it's been great. Like, I've been very lucky. It seems like every week, friends or acquaintances are sending us beers to try. For instance, like, I mentioned the Hop Butcher stuff showed up recently. So, basically just kind of go off of what, our kind of friends send us, and we always reciprocate and send beer. So it's not so much like trading. Well, it's not like orchestrating trades of beer with other breweries, but it's just like, especially these days when we're not seeing our friends, in other breweries across the country, it's just like, hey, we'll send you some beer, y'all send us some beer, and that's been fun. So, and just like stuff from all over the country is, kind of popping into my fridge from now and then. I don't have a beer cellar. I don't. I only have like maybe 2 weeks of beer in my fridge, and just kind of keep it, just continuously cycling. I have an inability to cellar anything. I just drink it and move on.
I want to follow up real quick because you were talking about table beer earlier, and with the announcement that Guinness is doing a non-alcoholic beer, are you guys seeing a trend down in Texas about low ABV and non-alcoholic beers and drinks that people want? And is Jester King doing anything?
So I'm still kind of puzzled by the, or not puzzled, but like curious about the non-alcoholic beer trend, which I keep, reading about and hearing about. I don't know much about it. When we ever make like low alcohol beers, Petite Prince being a little bit of an exception because it kind of, has a little reputation and legs by now after doing it for almost a decade. But they're slow movers. Like, we've not had a ton of success with low ABV beers. We do a beer called Commercial Suicide, which is like a 3%, English mild, which, low alcohol, which puts off, a segment of people. And then, dark beer, like not everyone loves to drink. So I again have to claim ignorance. Like, I don't know how that trend is doing well, because like whenever we do something low alcohol, it's slow.
I'm gonna kind of send it back to Rob to wrap up, unless Dan or Nick has another question.
All right. Got a couple. I guess we'll start with one serious and then one fun. But as pretty much most of us know, that water is a very important part of beer. We won't make the
water is 80% beer.
Damn it! I was saying that I was not going to make the former host Matt Bush inside joke, but Ken decided to already go there.
Still a great quote. Inside joke or not, water is 80% beer is a great quote.
And it's not necessarily inside because it's recorded. It is on a TV show. So he said it. It's on there. But obviously the quality of the beer can make the difference in the flavor of the beer. And as such, breweries will typically add chemicals like calcium carbonate or calcium sulfate to make the water softer. However, from what I've read is that you guys don't make too many, if any, changes to your water at all. So I'm curious, well, first, is that true? And if so, why, I guess, go with the water as it is and not change it, which seemingly is something that just seems like a very large contingent of the brewing community does.
Yes. It really speaks to our kind of core philosophy. We like to use the phrase, we make beer for, time, place, and people. We want to just express the character of our land, the seasonality, the individuals who create the beer, and really just kind of provide just kind of like this like liquid glimpse into, the terroir of the Texas Hill Country. And, part of that has been just using just raw Trinity aquifer well water. We're in this large limestone formation called the Edwards Plateau, and when it rains, the water has to percolate through 800 feet of limestone to reach the aquifer. And along the way, it picks up all kinds of minerality, and we've wanted kind of that, Trinity aquifer minerality to just be apparent in the flavor profiles of our beer. So for our farmhouse ales, we don't do any filtration or softening of the water. If we're trying to emulate a classic style, which we now do these days for some of our other beers, we would alter the profile and do alter the profile. Like we just put out like a Munich style Helles beer, and we softened the water, remarkably to kind of, clone, Munich. But for what we're known for and what's the bulk of our production, farmhouse ales, we're not trying to clone anyone else. We're just trying to say this is Jester King. This is Texas Hill Country, and along those lines, I think it's critical that we just like in a very just honest, authentic way, just say this is what like this environment creates. And so many beer styles historically are just products of their environment. Why is Pilsner made in Pilsen? Well, the water profile supported that. Like why IPA kind of originate in England? Well, the water profile supported that, and so on down the line. And so we're just trying to kind of like create our own little sub style of just like hill country terroir. But yeah, no, that's yeah, very excellent question. Yeah, very true to what we do.
All right, and last one, the fun one. I heard from somewhere that you wanted to be a basketball player when you grew up. Whose jersey are you wearing?
I did. So I grew up in Florida, before going to Indiana for college, and in Tampa. It was only 2 hours from Orlando. It was right when right when the Orlando Magic franchise was created. So I started following them and went to a game their inaugural season, which was like, I don't know, 89 or 88.
I think it was like 91, something like that. 91.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I became a fan of them. And then when they got, Shaq and Penny, that was huge, and, became just a huge fan. And then when, Shaq left for the Lakers, I was deflated. And, but yeah, basketball was my sport growing up. I had dreams of playing, I got to play all through high school and had dreams of playing in college, which didn't pan out. I wasn't quite good enough, but just have always loved the game. And, I was just I just loved the bubble setup. Yes, it would have been cool if there were fans there, but like I understand, why they weren't. And I don't know, I just thought that was so much fun. And just to see like the level of play that happened during the bubble with the time off. I mean, watching like Dame drain 3-pointers from like the logo, and watching like Luka like nutmeg people with his passes, and then Braun just like dominate as he always does. Right. It was pretty special. I loved it.
Yeah, and definitely, yeah, they definitely did bubble right without a doubt. There was one more actually question. This question comes from the chat from one of our regulars, Andrew Parr. He's wondering, do you have a favorite hop?
Yeah.
Actually, sorry to interrupt. And aged or fresh?
Okay. So I'll say my I mean, it's a tough choice, but I'll say.
Is it like choosing a favorite kid?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. There's some special hops out there, and it's hard to pick one, but I'll go with Czech Saaz. It's the main hop we use for Petit Prince or table beer, and just kind of that like earthy, peppery, spicy. Sometimes even like it sounds negative, but like slightly even like soapy character you get from Saaz. I really just love just like low alpha, noble European hops. I'm just really a fan of. I mean, I'm drinking a beer with Matueka and Mosaic and El Dorado, and those are awesome too. I like those, but I don't know, just being inspired by this farmhouse tradition, just kind of like your mellow, low alpha, just European noble hops are my jam.
I have one more question, then we're going to let you kind of plug where you guys are located and your socials. But everybody knows, and it's no surprise, that I love alt beers, and you guys make an alt beer called Simple Means. How does the culture down there appreciate or not appreciate necessarily the alt beer? Because we always find the alt beer in the same category as like an ESB or an English mild, where people just kind of stay away from it because they just don't know what it is. But down there, I mean, you guys got a logo. You don't, it's a little more than just a one-off beer. I think it's on draft right now over where you guys are. Or at least people are checking it in on Untapped. How does that play into the culture of craft beer in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. You like alt. I mean, that's one of my favorite styles as well. And I really would love to travel more extensively in Germany and experience the German, beer tradition. I have been to Dusseldorf, but it was that's basically Cologne and Dusseldorf is as far as I've gotten into Germany, and did get to have alt at three of the traditional producers. I unfortunately can't remember the names, but it was just pretty cool to see like the large, casks on the bar with, alt being gravity fed into glasses. And, that was pretty awesome. Actually, real quick, Hops and Grain Brewery, one of our local friends here, they make a beer called Alteration, which I think won gold at the World Cup in the alt style category. Our alt's a little weird. I mean, it's a farmhouse alt beer, so it's mixed culture alt. It's kind of alt like inspired. I would not say it's like a traditional alt beer. It's just like a mixed culture farmhouse version, which is fine. But that goes back to just like drinkability. I don't know. I love big beers. I love sharing them with friends, but 9 out of 10 times I'm just drinking something simple, crushable that I can just relax and don't have to like overthink. I like to think about beers, but I don't like to sometimes I don't want to overthink and analyze. And, alt is just such a just wonderfully drinkable style. Just like malty, but not over the top. So, that's alt's got to be, probably a top 5 all-time style for me. So that's cool. You dig it. And ours is weird. Just to be honest, ours is weird.
Well, I'll make sure to understand that when I come down to Austin, Texas. Jeffrey Stuffings, thank you so much for joining us. Jester King, Austin, Texas. They can get your beer obviously in Texas and Washington. Anywhere else? Tavor?
Oh yeah. So we're in about 25 states. Tavor. If any international folk are listening, we send a little bit of beer to Europe, Australia. I would just go to your, shop that typically we're like in kind of like your geeky shops around various locales.
All right, well, that's going to do it for Better on Draft episode 240. Stay tuned. We're going to be finishing the live portion of this where we're going to be going over the news, but that's going to be a separate podcast. Once again, thank you so much for coming. Go check out Jester King over in Austin, Texas, and we will be right back with the